order.
The Draft Vehicle Drivers Certificates of Professional Competence Amendment Regulations 2024.
Minister, would you be good enough to move the motion?
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I beg to move that the committee considers the Draft Vehicle Drivers Certificates of Professional Competence Amendment Regulations 2024. The purpose of this statutory instrument is to introduce an alternative route for renewal of the Driver's Certificate of Professional Competence, DCPC. This alternative will be recognised across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom and will offer more flexible courses than the current system, with an accelerated pathway for drivers to return to the profession. The existing process for demonstrating competence, which is recognised across Europe, will remain for those drivers who operate within the European Union and indeed Switzerland and the EEA, and will remain valid when driving in the UK. We are amending the existing Vehicle Drivers Certificates of Professional Competence Regulations 2007 under powers conferred by the retained EU Law Revocation and Reform Act 2023 and the European Union Future Relationship Act 2020. The regulations transposed EU Directive 2003/59/EC and were last amended in 2020. We're proposing to amend the regulations to increase choice and flexibility available to drivers when they renew. Honourable members may remember back in 2021 there was an acute shortage of lorry, bus and coach drivers, which caused significant disruption to critical supply chains. As part of its response, the Department launched a review of DCPC in 2021 involving industry, seeking views on ways to improve processes to increase recruitment and retention. Many felt that the current renewal process is inflexible and unnecessarily burdensome, in particular the time and cost burdens of the periodic training required for the renewal of qualifications. Currently, drivers must do 35 hours of training through a rigid structure, with courses being a minimum of 7 hours, and most courses being trainer-led. This was identified as contributing to drivers leaving the profession. Drivers and former drivers stated in the 2021 review that the burden of gaining the Certificate of Professional Competence, or I should say renewing, was acting as a barrier to those considering joining or looking to renew their qualification, leading to people leaving the sector. A public consultation was launched in early 2023, suggesting options for possible changes to the ways to demonstrate professional competence. That consultation, along with regular industry engagement, has informed the reforms we're proposing today to give drivers more options and greater flexibility during the renewal process and to assist the industry in retaining and recruiting drivers. Now, currently, as I've said, drivers renew their DCPCs every 5 years in order to drive in the UK or the EU by doing 35 hours of training through this rigid system of courses, minimum of 7 hours each, with little e-learning as an option. We're introducing a national qualification to sit alongside the existing international qualification. The national qualification, which will be valid across the UK, will still require 35 hours of training every 5 years, but courses can be shorter, with a minimum of 3.5 hours, and there will be more e-learning available, with new standalone e-learning courses being introduced, something that's currently not the case. This flexibility was something that many in the industry, and particularly drivers, have requested. We're also introducing an accelerated pathway to allow drivers to return to the workforce. If a driver's CPC has lapsed by more than 60 days but less than 2 years, the driver can take a 7-hour bespoke return to driving course to gain a 1-year national DCPC. This window of time was chosen to avoid drivers deliberately allowing their DCPC to lapse in order to take the accelerated return pathway, and to avoid drivers who've been out of the profession for a prolonged time from rejoining without adequate retraining. Within the 12-month validity period of their national DCPC, the driver can then do the remaining 28 hours of training to gain a full 5-year national or international DCPC. Now, I'm aware that some in the industry would have liked to abolish the DCPC entirely. And whilst I have some sympathy with drivers who see it as a burden based on time and cost to renew, I do believe that it's necessary for reasons of road safety and driver professionalism. And overall, that was supported in the consultation. Additionally, due to the requirements of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the EU and other international obligations, the DCPC must be kept for most commercial international road transport. These reforms will make renewing or regaining a DCPC much easier and more flexible for operators, but particularly drivers, easing the impact on work-life balance while not reducing the quality of the education drivers receive to maintain a safe and highly professional workforce in the road freight and passenger transport sectors. To conclude, these draft regulations will make changes to the driver certificates of professional competence regulations by making the renewal process more flexible for drivers operating solely in the UK and may help to reduce the chances of future driver shortages. We listened to stakeholders in all 4 nations while developing the amendments, and we expect these amendments to support the industry whilst ensuring a professional and safe workforce throughout the UK and beyond. To help the industry understand the more flexible training route, the Driver Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA, in Great Britain, and the Driver and Vehicle Agency, DVA, in Northern Ireland, will shortly issue guidance to the industry. I therefore commend the regulations to the committee.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft vehicle drivers certificates of professional competence amendment regulations 2024. Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Whilst the draft vehicle drivers certificates of professional competence amendment regulations 2024 may be touted as an innovative piece of legislation, I'm sure the Minister will be the first to accept it was in fact the product of successive Conservative governments which, following our exit from the European Union, took the decision to simplify regulations for our hard-working hauliers by asking the industry what it needed to thrive, whilst of course ensuring the high standards of vehicle and driver safety that have always been upheld and enhanced. These draft regulations are a culmination of that. Indeed, in the explanatory memorandum, Mr. Stringer, indeed the previous Minister, Guy Opperman, is listed as having signed the declaration on these regulations. Therefore, as this was an order that the previous government would have laid anyway, the official opposition will clearly not be dividing this delegated legislation committee today. What this legislation delivers is the long sought-after flexibility that the industry needs to ensure safety standards remain among the best in the world, all thanks to the work, I say again, of the previous government over the last few years. Hauliers will welcome options made available by the split between UK and international training programmes, as well as the means through which training is delivered. Above all, the option to complete a course over a series of half days rather than just full days. One critical element that is omitted from these regulations, however, Mr. Stringer, and perhaps the Minister would tell us why, is the incentive for hauliers to push the international training programme as a viable option for drivers, risking the available pool of drivers for overseas work by making it essentially an opt-in part of the job. Combined with the rumoured end to the previous government's fuel duty freeze, critical to hauliers since Conservatives first introduced it in 2011, and if this rise goes ahead, hauliers estimate, Mr. Stringer, that this could cost their businesses over £185 million a year. We must ask who is really standing up for our hauliers and championing the vital role they play in our economy. Because we're not going to divide the House, I will simply end by saying it is only because of our exit from the European Union that any of this is possible in the first place. And whilst the Labour government and whilst the Labour Party in opposition sat on their hands without making any real contribution to the haulage sector, blaming Brexit for every challenge the sector has faced over recent years, it was Conservatives in government, including drafting the very regulations in front of us today, that took steps to support hauliers on terms that were right for the United Kingdom, not for the European Union. So I gently ask the Minister, whilst welcoming the regulations today, what is it that this government is actually offering the haulage sector that's new?
Edward Morello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. With brevity in mind, I would just say that the Liberal Democrats support this measure to make training more convenient for drivers and small businesses. However, it is imperative that the quality of training, given the transition to e-learning, is not compromised, and we would urge the Minister to monitor closely the outcomes of these changes to ensure that there is no negative impact on road safety.
Well, I'd like to thank the Shadow Minister and indeed the Honourable Member for their thoughtful contributions, and I welcome the Shadow Minister's support for these regulations. As I set out in my opening comments, the Department conducted a review which ended in 2022. There is no question that this is continuing with work that had been started under the previous government. I suppose if one wished to play political games, one might query why it's taken such a long time for these regulations to appear in front of a committee. And it is this government that has ensured that they've been considered in good time, I think, and we are continuing to work closely with the haulage sector, and we're determined to support them as they move forward. We've already recognised the importance of freight and logistics with new wording in the draft National Policy and Planning Framework, which recognises the importance of the industry. The Shadow Minister may have missed it, but just in recent weeks I have been announced further funding to support improved HGV parking and driver welfare, and indeed further support for the freight transport sector through the Freight Innovation Fund. However, I'm straying off the point of today's debate. Can I also take the opportunity to answer the question about the quality of e-learning? And I think I'm really pleased that colleagues in the Liberal Democrats have welcomed the flexibilities that this introduces. I do want to reassure them that the 3.5 hours for standalone e-learning courses is considered to be the right balance between increased flexibility for drivers taking their training, whilst making sure that the course is long enough to be meaningful. There will be an audit process, and the DVSA will still approve all courses to make sure that they're of suitable quality. I particularly raised concerns about how will we ensure that the people are participating fully in the e-learning, and I am reassured that there will be a start and end time, so drivers won't be able to scoot through the courses quickly, and courses may include quizzes to make sure that someone's engagement is retained and to test that learning has taken place, although there's no mandatory course assessments required. So all courses are audited by DVSA to check records, and of course I will ensure that we continue to make sure that they are delivering the safe standards that we want to see. Now, the Shadow Minister asked about the availability of who will undertake the international DCPC. As I'm sure he will be aware, is a majority of possibly as much as 90% of freight drivers only operate within the UK, and so they may well choose to do the national DCPC. But obviously there are many hauliers who also drive across the European Union. That's a very important part of our supply chains, and for getting exports out to Europe, to the EEA and Switzerland. And of course for those drivers, they will want to continue to do the international DCPC. Of course, if the flexibility exists within those courses, so if you complete a 7-hour course, it will count to either national or international DCPC. So you can easily upgrade your national DCPC to an international DCPC, depending on the choices you make about the courses you undertake to make up the 35 hours. So I hope that provides him with the reassurance that this will continue to be available for those British drivers who need to operate internationally. These reforms to the way that professional drivers renew their driver certificate of professional competence will provide increased flexibility to those in the sector whilst maintaining the original purpose of the qualification, which is to improve road safety and driver professionalism. To abolish the qualification would be counter to those aims, and I'm interested that no one has mentioned that. We did consider that possibility, but we decided to keep the 35 hours of training because the consultation showed support for keeping it, with 60% of respondents opting to keep it as it is or responding to it. It's really important, I think, for road safety and for maintaining professional skills and standards in the industry, and I commend these regulations to the House.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft vehicle drivers' certificates of professional competence amendment regulations 2024. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.